Donovan, for joining us this afternoon. I know we had you with us some time ago, earlier on in the pandemic, but a lot has happened since then. Certainly a lot of things have changed, and we thought it'd be a good time to kind of catch up to speed and see what's been going on with the AG's office, and maybe you might hear something from credit unions that might be of interest to you. You know, TJ needs no introduction to everyone on the line. You all are well aware of who he is and are familiar with his background, I think. And so he's no stranger to Vermont Credit Unions. And TJ, we very much appreciate you joining us this afternoon. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Joe, thanks for having me, and I appreciated our last conversation, and happy to do it again, and happy to kind of give you guys an update about what we're up to and what we're seeing and hearing, and would love to hear from you guys as well.
Awesome.
I'm sure you're incredibly busy giving the real estate boom we're in and processing mortgages and second mortgages, and what's a 30-year rate right now?
Anybody want to share?
I think we're at 2 7/8 right now.
Wow.
I think we just came back under 3 last week, but don't quote me. It might have changed today, but it's hovering right around 3.
And do you see those rates going up in the summer and the fall?
No, I don't. But I think that, and we're not seeing the volume slow down at all. If there were more supply, we'd be obviously better off, but that's a national issue. So, but no, the volume's still coming in, and it's hard to keep up with at this point. So yeah, people are pretty busy. That's good though.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think from our end, you know, we're in a bit of a transition phase, you know, as we kind of ease out of COVID. We'll probably be easing out of, you know, the governor's emergency orders. Obviously, he just announced last week a change in regards to the mask mandate. But really, you know, for the past, I would say the primary focus for the past 15 months from our shop as the enforcement officer of state government was making sure that we were doing everything we could to educate and ensure compliance with the governor's executive order without being heavy-handed. You know, one of the things I was concerned about, and I think you saw this in other states, and I don't think you saw it here in Vermont for a lot of different reasons, was, you know, this pandemic obviously was incredibly hard on so many different levels for all of us. And Vermonters, by and large, certainly did the right thing, and our numbers bear that out. And I think early on, there was a deliberate effort by the state to make sure, and something I've always believed in terms of the way to enforce the law is to give people the opportunity to comply with it across the board, regardless of what the question is in terms of the legal question, in terms of the rule or the regulation. We're a small state. We should be letting people know what the rules of the game are so they can comply with it. And so one of the first things we did, and I'm remiss, I didn't introduce Brooke Jenkins from my shop is on with us. Brooke is the executive assistant. She is a relatively recent graduate from the University of Vermont, where she captained the women's soccer team. And believe this, she is going on to play, I'm going to call it professional soccer, Brooke. Do I have that right? In Vermont.
I missed some of the introduction because I was on the phone. However, yes, I'm playing right now. It's not, this is like a more like semi-pro sort of team that I'm playing on at the moment. So, but
out of Manchester, right?
Yeah, I'm in Manchester, Vermont right now. So this is actually my first day. We had practice this morning.
And what's the name of the league?
It's called the WPSL, which is the Women's Premier Soccer League. So it's like underneath the NWSL, which is the National Women's Soccer League, which is like where all the really good players play.
So Joe, just a great sponsorship opportunity for all your members.
We'll promote that.
Yeah.
Appreciate you hyping me up, TJ.
You got it, Brooke.
Brooke doesn't mind running on the field with a jersey with credit union logos all over it or something. we'll get to work on that.
Absolutely. So early on, it was about making sure that we had the proper infrastructure in place in my office. And so we kind of created a rapid response team to deal with every question that came in. And early on, it was a lot about businesses and a lot about folks who were trying to keep their lights on, and how can you comply with the governor's executive order and still operate your business. And I am very proud of the way our team responded, which was a very simple directive. Talk to everybody, work through the issues, work through the problems. Obviously, the top priority is going to be the public health. But if we can be creative here, let's be creative. We worked very closely with ACCD. So how it worked, obviously, the governor would give the order. Commerce would interpret the order, and we would enforce the order. And as you all know, you get a bunch of lawyers in the room to interpret and enforce, and things can get real confusing real fast over certain words. But we only had to file 2 lawsuits. And I'm proud of that. I wish it was 0, to be perfectly honest with you, because I think most people tried to do the right thing, and you work with folks. And there was a lot of different calls and concerns. But the 2 lawsuits we filed was gym owner down in Rutland. This is now a year ago, just wouldn't shut down, when gyms were closed. And we went back and forth with them. And we ended up filing a lawsuit, really an injunction, to prevent him from operating. And we were able to work that out. I think I had him pay a contribution to the local food bank down there, because my view is you're not putting the rest of the state, you're putting your community at harm. Then we got a guy up in Newport running a UPS store who wouldn't follow the mask mandate, and that's proving to be a little bit different, and that's still pending. But overall, in terms of the work, was just dealing with the daily questions as they came in, working with our partners in state government, and really just interacting with Vermont businesses and Vermonters, and trying to educate them, and trying to raise awareness, and trying to solve problems. And I'll be glad when this is over, as I'm sure all of us will be. The other part issue that I want to bring to your attention, because I would love to figure out a way to partner with you guys, are robocalls and scams. So we just did this case a couple weeks ago, and it was a pretty cool case. We were able to trace back a robocall. First of all, robocalls are out of control, and 160,000 robocalls come into Vermont every day. And I think it was like in March of 21, there was 5 million. And obviously there are some legitimate, but most of them obviously are illegitimate scams. And we're getting so many of them because they work. And we were able to trace back a robocall to India. And then we were able to, and we worked very closely with the Social Security Administration. And the Social Security scam is the number 1 scam out there, I think nationwide. And so we worked with the Social Security Administration. We worked with U.S. Telecom, which is the trade association for some of the telecom companies. And we're able to do this traceback investigation to this call in India. And we've always said in the past, when people said, hey, what are you doing about robocalls? We'd kind of shrug our shoulders and say, well, it's kind of a global issue. And a lot of the bad guys are outside of Vermont. There's not much we were able to do. But we were able to figure out who the gateway carrier is in the US, and it was a small little company out of Florida. And the interesting part of this was these calls touch about 8 different players before it hits the Vermonter's phone. And we were able to locate this gateway carrier down in Florida, and we're able to reach an agreement with them, essentially basically saying, you have to vet all these calls. And if they're illegitimate, they cannot come into Vermont. And I think it's going to be a useful framework, because my sense is there's a lot of these gateway carriers, and the guy wasn't making a lot of money. I couldn't figure out the business here. I mean, it wasn't his primary business, but it was not big money in terms of what he was generating in terms of revenue. But we're able to get an order in place where he now has to vet all these calls, and if they're illegitimate, he can't send them through to Vermont. And I'd love to figure out, Joe, how we partner with you guys, because obviously some of those calls get through, a lot do, and people get scammed and they get ripped off. We had a case last, I want to say summer, but I can't remember. My neighbor calls me, and his dad's about 87 years old down in Rutland, and he got a call, living on Social Security, and got a call that his son had been in a terrible accident, and he needed was in the hospital and needed immediate medical attention. And in order to get the treatment needed or the surgery, he had to pay, I think it was $12,000 or $17,000 immediately. 87-year-old guy wires the money. And we were able to get in touch with the bank, and I got called probably 9:00 at night from my neighbor, but we were able to get on the phone with Chris Delia from the Banking Association, figure out what the bank was, and we were able to stop the wire transfer. And so I'd love to kind of connect, Joe, with you guys about who the point person is to put in a phone tree about who we should call when we have those types of scams, because time, as you know, is truly of the essence. And that, the scam stuff, it never shows up like in the news, but I think from a consumer protection standpoint, it's one of the most important issues facing Vermont. And, you look at our demographics, obviously we're a little bit older. Scams look for vulnerable people. And I would love to kind of build this coalition with you all, and hopefully we never have to use it, but just so we have the lines of communication in place when those types of cases happen. You think about that. Guy living on Social Security, here's his son's been hurt. Of course, he's going to do whatever he thinks he can do to help save him. And it was big money. And that was a positive story. I think, we probably miss a lot of those, but would love to follow up with you, Joe, after this meeting to see if we could put that in place. And so I'm really kind of focused on what we can do in terms of just protecting Vermonters and making sure that people are getting a fair shake from government when they call. That we can. I really feel strongly right now the level of cynicism is pretty darn high in our country. I'm amazed at kind of the negativity that's out there, and I have a very simple rule with my team that every call that comes in, we need to have a sense of urgency about. It's not going to be the most important call for us, but if somebody is calling us, that means that they're in crisis and they need our help, and that it's the most important call for them. And we're not going to be able to answer all their questions. We're not going to be able to solve all their problems, but sometimes talking folks through the issue and directing them to the appropriate resource is just good government. It's good constituent service. It's good customer service, as you all know. And that's really kind of been the rallying cry in our shop this last year, is have a sense of urgency about solving people's problems. And the small stuff matters, because if they're calling us, it matters. And we're talking about people's livelihood. We're talking about people's money. And we're talking about people who are worried, and you bring in technology. We got some stuff going on with tech. I think privacy, we can talk about fintech. I think privacy is a big issue in terms of how do we carve out consumer privacy. I think, when we talk about consumer protection, it's increasingly online. We got some stuff going with some other states about I'm seeing being recorded, so I'm being a little bit careful in my remarks about looking about how do we protect people's data. Do people deserve to be notified on the sale of their data? We have a lawsuit right now against Clearview AI, and that's a company that essentially would screen scrape images from kind of public domain, arguably, I don't know, sites, which whether or not that's a violation of the terms of service, that's not really our role, but they'd screen scrape billions of images, and then including children's, and then they would apply facial recognition software to it, and then they would sell it, and they'd sell it to these unknown third parties. And they said, well, it's just law enforcement. It wasn't just law enforcement. In my view, as a Vermonter and as a parent of 2 young kids, is you need my permission to do that to my kids. I don't know, first of all, this biometric data, the facial recognition software is incredibly invasive. You're selling it, you're applying it, you're selling it to this third party with no notice, no consent. My view was that's a deceptive and unfair act. We've sued them in Vermont state court. We've survived a motion to dismiss. But I think this issue of privacy, I think this issue of what does it mean in terms of social media, who takes the data, who's buying and selling it in the background, creating these algorithms, directing it to a certain group of consumers. These issues and how we develop them in terms of carving out people's privacy, but allowing for economic development at the same time, I don't think it's an either-or proposition. I think we can do both. I think Vermont, I'm very excited about our broadband build out, getting back to the market and making sure that everybody has a shot at working remotely, and whether we have to do school remotely. Certainly we need the broadband build out. But I think how we carve out that issue of economic development, what the economy, this new economy, is going to look like online, we got to make sure that we're protecting people's privacy too. And again, it's not an either or, in my opinion. We can do both. And I think Vermont can lead on that. And I think privacy is going to become more of a mainstream political issue, in my opinion, because you hear it, and there's bits out there that are certainly all going to come together. And I think we'll be in the middle of that issue this year. It's something I feel very strongly about. The other case that we're trying to settle has been going on for years, is this opiate litigation. We've sued the Sackler family, who started Purdue Pharma personally, and obviously Purdue and a bunch of other distributors. And that case is in bankruptcy court, and there's an offer. We've rejected the offer. My view is, I find it objectionable that the Sacklers, who are not declaring bankruptcy but are in bankruptcy court, because they're adding value to the deal in terms of dollars, can get the benefit of bankruptcy court, which is having all your claims extinguished against you. I got an issue with that, and I'm kind of one of, I think, a few states that are holding out on that. I don't know where that will sugar off, but I certainly want a settlement because we're in desperate need of money in this state to go back to the communities to address this issue of addiction. I saw a headline today, I haven't read the article, which I knew that overdoses were up this past year. And the headline said they've been increasing. And that's no surprise to me given the pandemic, but I think we have to be constant in our delivery of resources, not from Montpelier, but to the communities about what works for people who are struggling with addiction and what works for prevention to stop kids from ever getting started on this stuff. We made a lot of progress in Vermont, but it seems like these numbers are going back up. And so I'm hopeful that we can get a deal in place here over the summer and get those resources back into the community. Joe, the last issue I just want to touch on, and I'm happy to take questions, is the issue of police accountability. And Vermont, it's a change in the law that I supported, just changed the use of force law. And in the past, it was essentially a reasonableness standard. And this will go into effect July 1. Now it's going to be use of force essentially only when it's necessary. And I think that is something that is needed. I think that is a positive development. The police have an incredibly difficult job, but what we need is less force, less use of force. We need to build more trust. We need to train and invest in de-escalation and cultural competency, in making sure that we understand the communities who we are policing, to build that trust, not only from the police to the community, but to the community to the police. Because at the end of the day, it comes down to the public trust. And so we need to do a lot of work there. Obviously, we need to continue to do a lot of work on the issues of bias and racism in our state, and certainly when it comes to policing. And these are challenges that we should meet, frankly, with open arms, because we want to make sure in Vermont that we're when we're a welcoming place, when we are a tolerant state, when we're an accepting state, when we're a state that can resolve issues and understand people's crises, whether it's a mental health crisis, and not respond with guns or force, but with empathy and compassion. That's a state that I want to live in, and that may be an aspirational goal, and we may never reach it, but it's something we should continue to strive for, in my opinion. Those cases are incredibly difficult. There is a reckoning, rightfully so, on the issues of police accountability and racial justice in our state, in our country. And in law enforcement, we have to lead, and we have to be willing to accept the criticism of what we've done wrong in the past, and we have to be willing to try new things and be open to that constructive criticism, because it's not about law enforcement, it's about the public and the public's view. Because at the end of the day, as I tell people all the time, that's who we're working for. We're working for the people of the state, and we got to listen to them. And and this is a complicated issue, but it's an issue that we've put a lot of work into these past couple of years to reform our criminal justice system, to certainly reduce our incarceration, which we have, and we still spend too much money on corrections in Vermont, in my opinion. We spend more on corrections than we do on higher education. I don't think that's a priority anybody supports. And there's different ways of doing business, in my opinion. And you look at the outcomes and the recidivism rate, millions and millions and millions of dollars that I think if we invested in the community, and really redefining what a safe and vibrant community looks like. It's not jail cells, it's not courthouses, not prosecutors, it's not lawyers, it's not police. It really is about early childhood ed. It's about access to healthcare, good schools, affordable housing, training our workforce for the 21st century economy, so there's jobs, making sure that Vermont is a good place to do business. I understand from a regulator standpoint, from that enforcement standpoint, you all know this, that what business want is predictability and certainty and accessibility. Tell me what the rules are. I'm going to do the right thing. And for me, what comes down, when you distill that all down, is doing this, communicating with folks. And again, I think the benefit of Vermont is we're a small state where we can have these conversations and people can understand what the rules are. I mean, it really frustrates me when you hear businesses and people who can't navigate state government. I mean, that shouldn't be the case in a state our size. And that's, we can always have our disagreements and the rules are going to be the rules. But people need to understand what the rules are. And we're a state of small businesses. And not everybody has a general counsel. Not everybody has a compliance officer. It's somebody who's wearing multiple different hats trying to do the right thing. And so I'm actually pretty excited I'm optimistic about Vermont's future right now in terms of our economic growth and where we are. I think if we can, get all this federal stimulus money out the door in Montpelier into the communities, that's a good thing. And I still view as a Democrat, as I always like to say, that Montpelier is not going to create one job. You all are. You guys, access to capital is a critical part of that, and how we're making sure we're lending to folks who have a great idea. And perhaps, and you know this better than anybody, perhaps wouldn't qualify for financing at another institution, and really believing in people and then getting out of their way. And I say that from government, getting out of their way and trusting people to do the right thing. And that's my view. Sometimes one of my colleagues gets mad at me and calls me a libertarian. And I think I got a streak of that, but I think it's more of a Vermont streak of that you trust people to do the right thing. And once they know what the rules are, most people do the right thing. And I think if we can kind of take that view and really embed it and bake it into state government, we can do great things in this state. And I think we're at a critical juncture in Vermont, though. I really do. I think we have to invest and we have to grow. That is clear to me. And the market, as we said, is that's great, but we want to make sure that there's opportunity for everybody. And that goes back to those public institutions of schools and healthcare and housing. And I know you all play a critical role there, so I want to thank you. But always, this is complicated. It's all interconnected. But from the view from government is to make those investments in community, to trust people, to give people the leeway and the space to have a great idea and to grow it. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and she was telling me her story of her son who started a small business. And I said, how's he doing? He said, well, the first couple of years were hard. He didn't know if he was going to make it. And, he's able to get the financing and, get it off the ground, blah, 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 blah. And he just celebrated his 10th year. And we should all be celebrating that. I've always viewed that the best form of public safety is a good job. Jobs matter. And I think if we can take that view and understand that from government's perspective, that it's the private sector that's going to grow the jobs, that it's going to be that small business owner that's going to go to your credit unions, Joe, and ask for that loan. That's what we got to do. And I'm just very optimistic right now about the state. I'm very optimistic about our nation. I think Joe Biden's doing a great job. And I look forward to really kind of what the next 3 to 6 months is going to look like. So I know I've talked for too long. Happy to take questions, Joe, from anybody in the group or whatever you think.
Thank you for that update, TJ. Very interesting stuff, and certainly a lot of it. Hey, I want to encourage everyone this is a conversation. I want to encourage you to feel free to jump in and make comments, reactions, questions, whatever strikes your fancy during this discussion. And going back to your comment early on, TJ, about, coordinating and communicating regarding scams of consumers that come up suddenly and whatnot. Yes, we obviously be happy to work with your office and have in the past on things like that. Probably be best to involve the Department of Financial Regulation as well as kind of a hub or a focal point of communications for all financial service providers in the state. And they've done that with us from time to time when some of those things crop up. So thank you for that. You know, and it's not in line with anything that you've mentioned here, and I don't know if it's crossed your desk or not, but one of the things that for some reason crossed my mind while you were talking is that I guess it's because you mentioned about, you know, people working from home more and more scams going on and whatnot, because everyone has more during the past year or so, more attention on all that and everything. And that reminds me that the payment system for financial service providers, you know, credit and debit card issuers and whatnot, is the face of it is changing a lot. And there's a lot of developments that are happening in that sector, fintechs you mentioned, that probably got sped up a little bit by the past year of pandemic and whatnot, with people not wanting to be working with cash and handing plastic cards across the counter and all that kind of stuff. And that brought me around to the issue of reading more about cryptocurrencies of late and whatnot. And, you know,
I'm glad you brought that up.
I was going to ask you, you know, if there's anything related to cryptocurrency that has crossed your desk of late. I know in some states, there's a lot more effort to try to introduce cryptocurrencies in an official kind of capacity, legislatively and whatnot, into their states. But what about from a scam standpoint and whatnot? Or
Yeah, no doubt. I just was, I spoke at a conference that actually remotely, that was actually in South Africa. And South Africa had a huge scam with crypto. I think millions and millions of dollars.
Wow.
And so how do you legitimize that? You know, I was noticing on I think the Vermont state tax form, they had the question, did you buy or sell any cryptocurrency this year? And I thought that was great. But how do we legitimize this? Obviously, Coinbase is now a publicly traded company. But I had a question from a constituent the other day. And I didn't have the answer, Joe. It was, if I get paid in crypto, how do I essentially validate, and this was Bitcoin, how do I validate the value? Like, so I get paid in Bitcoin, what if it drops? And, you know, I said, I don't know. But I think, and I'm fascinated by this whole discussion, that how do you bring transparency and legitimacy and regs to this industry? I was talking to a neighbor, and he said, you know, and he's all over this stuff. He said, you got to buy some. I said, I'll check it out. You know, I said, I'm a little nervous. And I said, I would go to Coinbase. He said, don't go to Coinbase. He said, why? He said, they're going to charge you this fee. I said, but that tells me legitimacy. A fee is a good thing, in my opinion. You know, that tells me there's a cost of doing business. And so how do we do that to answer that consumer's question about, okay, I'm gonna get paid in Bitcoin for this transaction. What happens if the value that I sold the item for, the Bitcoin now goes down? How do you, again, I saw on the Vermont tax form, how do you report it? How is it, how do you convert it? What type of tax is it? Is it a capital gain? All these questions, I think what we have to do is simplify it and tell people again what the rules are so they understand it and bring that transparency into it. I mean, how are you guys dealing? I mean, are you even in this space? I'm fascinated by this conversation. In fact, I'm trying to, I'd love to include you guys in October. I'm the chair of the Eastern region for the National Attorney General, and we're doing a conference in October in Vermont, and we're bringing up somebody from the SEC, a commissioner, to talk about crypto and how do we interact, certainly from the federal standpoint, regulator, but also our lane is going to be consumer protection. How do you deal with that constituent who said, well, I sold it for, half a Bitcoin, but Bitcoin went down 10,000 yesterday. I don't know, but I would. And how do you bring in blockchain technology that seems to bring a bit about a much more of a secure transaction to this? I think there's a space that Vermont can kind of lead on, on this. You think about captive insurance, and what we did with that now, 30 years ago or something. Is there something similar that Vermont can be a leader in this in this space, and create a regulatory sandbox that not only from our shop, but from P-Check's shop, working with, again, the feds, working with our financial institutions, so everybody knows what the rules of the game are, that it's a good place to do business, that the rules are clear, the rules are fair. You can talk to your government regulator if you have a question. Consumers are protected. There are, in fact, arm's length transactions. I look at and you guys know this better than me, what is the economy going to look like in 6 months to a year? What is work going to look like? I don't know. But, that idea of these transactions occurring, and not knowing what the value is, or holding the crypto and having the value drop or increase, understanding the tax implications, I'm fascinated by it. We would love to. I'm actually pretty excited for that conversation in October. And we're trying to bring in some other companies to have actually this conversation, Joe. Okay, we tell you what our rules are. You tell us what you need to operate in a jurisdiction, for that predictability, for that transparency. Our rule is always the same. It's going to be protecting consumers. How we do that online in this space, we need to figure out, because the one truism that I am always stuck with is this: technology is going to outpace the law. How can we be flexible? How can we be adaptable? How can we make sure that our mission of protecting folks stays constant, but that we are nimble and flexible enough to change with the business changes? I wish I had the answer. Are you guys in that space right now?
I don't know any Vermont credit unions that are. There are a couple credit unions nationwide in, I think, a couple states that have started to permit some kind of, or create some kind of regulatory structure. But I don't know, anybody able to weigh in on any of that?
We're not in it, and currently not planning on getting in it.
Tell me, just because of the unregulated nature of it,
As well as the complexity of it.
Yeah.
Who is responsible for that rise or fall in value? That's just one trigger or one level. So we have, and our systems can't handle that. Our systems, put in $1, you have $1.
Right.
So to try to have a deposit reconciliation that changes with a market value, that's not something, core systems are built to do. We actually don't, we had a session a couple months ago, we were talking about a fraud scenario, and we were trying to figure out, does anybody know how to buy Bitcoin? And that was real for us. So no, we're not, there's someday we'll probably look at that a little closer, but it's not on our plans right now.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It is that, I'm glad you said that, John, because it really was that question from the constituent. How do I know the value? Well, I don't know. The value is the value the day you received it. I can't tell you what it's going to be 5 minutes later or 5 days later. And, I don't understand either. I'm assuming it's a capital gain, but I don't know that. And who's giving you who's sending you the tax form? And so I don't know, but it seems, that you get a publicly traded company. It seems like some of these bigger banks are in the space. fascinated again by if we can get this SEC commissioner to come up. You know, is there a role for Vermont, again, to your point, John, about can we have transparent, easy to understand rules in place that are good, that protect the consumer and are good for business, so we have an arm's length transaction? No idea, but I also know this: we should not turn a blind eye to this either, because it's here and it's coming.
Right.
I was just gonna, I'm sorry, I was gonna say exactly the same thing, TJ. We can't ignore it. It is coming. I'm sure credit unions won't be on the bleeding edge of this, but the bigger banks and the money center institutions are all over it. And I think we have to watch carefully for two reasons, probably more, but two that I can think of. One is that it could potentially be a threat to financial institutions, because it's another way of doing business that's out of our control. That's one thing, probably down the road, 5 or 10 years, not 6 months. But also it could hurt our members. You know, if we have someone who needs to repay a loan and they've tried to create wealth in a different type of currency, and then they try to convert it back to dollars so they can repay the loan. We thought we only had to worry about the value of their house falling. Right. Now do we have to worry about the value of their Bitcoin portfolio falling? It's only falling relative to the dollar, right? So everyone's always going to translate back into dollars. There's always going to be that. It's got to get back into dollars somehow, or it doesn't have any value at all. So it's a foreign exchange kind of a question. And if any of our borrowers was playing the foreign exchange market in any scale, we would be concerned. So I think it's a concern for the exchange reason, for the fact that it could hurt our members. And it also, we can't stick our heads in the sand forever, because it's going to happen. All the big institutions are already very involved.
So my buddy who is into this, and I was too scared to do it just for all these conversations. But I said to him, I go, so is it an asset? He said, what do you mean? I said, it's an asset. I said, is it a lie? You're not telling me it's a liability. Would you list it as an asset? He's like, well, it's money. I said, is it though? Because to your point, relative to the dollar, you got to convert it. And I don't know enough about it, but I know exactly what you just said, Kate, that we can't put our head in the sand about it. And I think from Vermont's perspective, if you could create rules around it that everybody can get consensus on and are good for consumers, and which are your members, we should have the conversation. And so, if I can put this thing together in October, Joe, I'll extend an invite to you guys, because I think it's a fascinating conversation.
Please do.
And I love the idea if Vermont, because you always hear about these states that are business friendly. And the business friendly part in this part is, what are the rules of the game, guys? Like nobody has rules. And so if we can build rules that again have the fundamentals of consumer protection and transparency and predictability, let's engage in that conversation. We might as well. I'm very interested in this though. Now the South Africa experience though was there was a big fraud there, and my takeaway on this, the little part of the conference that I was involved in, was all about the dark web, organized crime, global criminal networks. And it was like, whoa, okay, there's a lot to learn here, guys. This isn't, going in and buying, a piece of Bitcoin and hoping it goes up to $300,000. So it's a tough one, because
someone explained cryptocurrencies to me early on as comparing it to the stock market, in that when you invest in the stock market, you're investing in the value of things, and whether it's the productivity of a manufacturer or innovation or technology or agriculture or mining or whatever. When you, excuse me, when you invest in cryptocurrencies, it's investing, he said, in air. It's its value is whatever people say it's worth. And they sell it to each other and move it around, and it goes up and down all the time.
It's going to be fascinating how this develops. And I don't know where we end up, but I do think we got to be part of the conversation, because it's going to impact your members. It's going to impact our consumers and Vermonters. You know, Joe, to your point, and I think I dropped this line on my buddy. I said, well, Warren Buffett says invest in things that you use and you like. You know, what is this? So I mean, the speculation and the risk is real. We'll see. I'm also, and I don't know if Vermont will collect this data. I'm sure we can. We should see how many Vermonters check that box. I think it was on the state form about I think it was just probably did you sell cryptocurrency? I'm very interested in that, to know what percent of Vermonters are in this, and if it's a a good number, that tells us, well, okay, let's get busy and let's make sure that there's rules that everybody understands. Not to say, hey, we're taking it for the tax, but we're taking it for the consumer protection and the protection for your members. I'm fascinated by that whole topic, though.
Other questions or comments, Jean?
I'm pretty amazed that they haven't figured out how to tax it, since it's been around for a little while and people are definitely buying and selling it, because I have people that I know that are buying it for investment purposes. So that it's not being taxed is pretty shocking.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would imagine if you answered that question, yes, on the whether it was miscellaneous income or what, that you probably had to list it somewhere.
You might be hearing from somebody from the tax department.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's funny just having this conversation, because I have this conversation with my friend all the time, and I'm always asking, so what, what, and he's just not in the space, and I'm like, look, this is my job. I think about regs and compliance and consumer protection, and making sure that this stuff, do you have to list it? I think it's an asset.
One of the cool things, one of the interesting things about it is the libertarians' currency. So to your point earlier, this is the currency for people who don't like regulation, for people who don't want rules, and they've created a way to thwart the rule makers. So it's especially interesting.
I read also that the Fed is considering creating it, which will
creating their own crypto.
Yes, which will
Holy cow! Wow.
The value of anybody else's crypto. So it was an article I read.
Within the Federal Reserve System. So, to Kate's point that she mentioned, as soon as there is an official government cryptocurrency, the attractiveness of it will go down, because it's not outside the rules anymore. Sorry, go ahead, TJ.
Yeah, no, it's just this weird space. I mean, again, Coinbase is a publicly traded company, and my friend saying they charge, their fees are too high. My view from the government perspective is that's legitimacy, that's compliance, that's oversight. That's a good thing. I could be wrong, but I just think it's going to be interesting how this plays out. But Brooke, let's make a note of the credit unions as we develop that October agenda. So I think this whole fintech space, this disruption that we're all kind of talking about, I'm really interested in, because from the government perspective, how do we keep pace? How are we aware? To your point, well, they're operating outside the system and not playing by the rules. Well, the rules are in place to protect people. because we don't want people getting ripped off. And we know enough people to know, oh my God, people have made, thousands or millions on this thing. People are going to jump at it. And anytime there's an opportunity, people are going to take advantage of it. And that's where people are going to get ripped off. And so the consumer protection piece here is critical. And again, I don't know enough about it, but the takeaway from the South Africa conversation was, well, there's real risk here. I mean, you start talking about global criminal networks, and that's you're saying, holy cow. Let's make sure that we know what's going on first, and let's make sure that in our little corner, that at least as best we can, we're protecting Vermonters here. If people want to engage in it, great. Let's just make sure that everybody knows the rules and people are protected.
So the role for financial institutions is probably pretty limited today regarding cryptocurrencies, but in line with what your concerns are and your office's concerns about people, at risk. I've heard through credit union channels elsewhere in the country that perhaps one of the biggest roles for credit unions, perhaps banks too, with their customers and members is one of education in this area. That if you're going to be taking money from your account in your credit union to buy some cryptocurrencies, perhaps there's an opportunity there to provide some level of education for people, much like we do with, protecting the elderly and so on and so forth. To make sure.
But Joe, what happens when somebody comes for that mortgage and they list a substantial amount of crypto? Are you guys going to lend?
I think that everybody on the line would agree that there's a lot of questions that you have yourself that we don't have answers to. And I don't think that we're in the minority.
Yeah.
Either.
I mean, that's the critical question, right? If people start lending on it.
Well,
I don't know enough about it, but I'm intrigued and interested by it because it's so complicated and nuanced and interesting, and it's that disruption, and we've seen in every sector disruption, and we have to think about that.
Right. Well, as somebody pointed out, it probably seems pretty foreign to traditional financial service providers today, but it is looming. So we'll have to get accustomed to it. Hey, TJ, there's one more thing that I wanted to run past you, but I already know, I think, your position on it, but wondered if you'd share it with everyone here. And that's as the legislature winds down, one of the bills that we were watching was S7 about the whole expungement, sealing of financial records and so on and so forth. And you wrote an article sometime back, I think, about that. And I found it interesting, and just, because there's financial crimes that could be part of that too, we were monitoring it. So I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing your perspective on that piece of legislation.
Yeah, I support it. I don't think it's going to happen this year is kind of the weather report I'm getting. And I support it, I think, Joe, for a couple of reasons. As I mentioned earlier, we're at this inflection point in our criminal justice system, and our criminal justice system it's prosecuted too many people. It really has. And the issue is that these criminal records never go away. And so after you've completed your sentence, have truly paid your debt back to society, you are still left out in the cold because that record still shows up and impacts housing, impacts employment opportunities, certainly educational opportunities. There are hundreds, I think, and that's not an overstatement, of these collateral consequences as a result of these criminal convictions. And my view of it is nobody ever intended, when people were sentenced, to take away people's economic opportunity. And so for me, it is about jobs. It's also about this issue of addressing racial disparities in our criminal justice system. Disproportionately, people of color have been prosecuted. in Vermont, our incarcerated population is close to, I think, 10%. People of color, general population is maybe between 1.5 and close to 2. I mean, it should be a direct reflection. It's not. So give people an opportunity to be a productive member of our community by hitting the reset button. I understand from your perspective the concern of somebody who is a serial embezzler or whatnot working in the financial field. And what I would say to this is these expungements are not automatic. There's a petition process where you have to go in front of the court. My view is that prosecutors who really have a lot of discretion, not exclusive discretion here, are aware of that. I certainly was aware of it in terms of the crimes that you'd look at. And there's a petition process that people have to explain. And so, but I think overall, the balance tilts in favor of giving people the opportunity to get the job, to be productive members of our community. Look, here's the other thing. You got Vermonters who can't take their kids on a school field trip because something they did stupid as a kid. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And so I get the downside, but there's a process in place. I think the upside just outweighs the risk. So we've held so many people back. And you get, again, to the unfairness of the world. You get to the disparities that exist, economically, racially, socially, and we've taken away people's opportunity to live their life. And I'm frankly I feel very strongly about this. If you can't tell, I'm really disappointed that the rhetoric about this, got to public safety. It's not about public safety anymore. The science is really clear. And it's common sense, you age out of being stupid at some point in time. And your risk of recidivism goes down substantially over time. And we gotta, kind of what I was saying earlier, we gotta believe in the goodness of people. And we gotta believe also, something I feel very passionate about is having worked in this business and frankly having a little experience myself personally with it, is people shouldn't be defined by the worst moments in life, especially when you're young. I got arrested when I was 18. I got drunk and I got into a fight. And I got what was called a deferred sentence, which allowed the expungement. I came from a family of some resource, social capital. My dad was a lawyer, and we're hurting poor people and who don't have those resources. And I just think that people who are in the criminal justice system in Vermont are mostly the poor, mostly people of color, and we have marginalized them and kept them marginalized in the name of public safety, and it hasn't worked, and we got to be honest about it. So from your standpoint, I acknowledge the concern. I don't think that the majority of the cases, and the serious stuff is not eligible. I want to be clear about that. The big stuff is not eligible. Now, that doesn't obviously address all the concerns from you guys, but I would just go back to that it's a process, and there's a hearing, and you got to make the case. So you got the prosecutor and you got a judge who's got to sign off on it. And I think if you're talking about, $1 million embezzlement or some other financial crime that shocks the conscience, I don't think it would be expunged.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Your perspective is valued. Thank you. Other questions or comments for TJ at all at 1 minute past the hour? All right. I think Brooke has her clock going and she's, going to cut us off. So thank you, Brooke, for being patient. Thank you, TJ, for spending the hour with us. We very much appreciate it.
I really enjoyed the conversation. And I'd love to reach out to you guys on those two issues, on the scam stuff. And as we put this thing together, I think we're going to do a panel on cryptocurrency and consumer protection, and would love to have you guys there, whether it's just as guests or, just to listen.
Sure. We would appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Great.
And thank you everybody for attending this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you, Pete.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Have a good night.